How to hardwire your dash camera to your vehicle's fuse box. There's a lot of bad information out there. We see it all the time. People on the forums arguing about how constant power and ignition need to be hooked up. Well, what if I told you that the ignition wire, it didn't actually really matter how it was hooked up? You're probably going to look at me and go, "You're all wrong. It matters. If it's hooked up wrong and the fuse tap's put in wrong, it's going to cause all these electrical issues." Well, I'm going to show you why it doesn't matter how you hook up the ignition wire on these certain dash cameras. But it definitely matters on how you hook up the constant power. Okay, so what is a parking mode cable, also known as a hardwire cable? Well, to kind of explain that in full, I want to explain to you what most dash cameras come with. They typically still come with a cigarette lighter cable. And you basically just take this, plug it in, and voila, you plug it into your cigarette lighter. However, a lot of newer vehicles, if you have a newer vehicle, you'll notice they have USB-C plugins. They don't even have cigarette lighter plugins anymore. And if they do have a cigarette lighter plugin, typically that plug-in, like on my Volkswagen ID4, is all the way in the boot of the vehicle or the hatch, depending on how you look at it. It's like 20 feet away. I'm not going to be able to plug it in there. I'm not going to have any way to power my dash camera to work. So what am I supposed to do? Well, typically what people do is they get a hardwire cable. This also gives you the ability to turn on parking mode. And as you can see, this will plug directly in to the Thinkware unit and gives you 3 wires that need to be hooked up to the vehicle. So, like I said, this gives you the ability to record while parked or hardwire it. Just that way you don't see the wires everywhere as well. A lot of people don't like the wires, and I can understand. I know my OCD goes a little crazy when I see tangles and wires. It really bugs me. But, and a Viofo is a little bit different. So they actually have USB-C connector. It'll plug in to the back of the unit here. And then the 3 wires for hardwiring. And this is an additional accessory that you have to purchase. So like I said, the majority of these don't come in the box. And usually they're, anywhere from $20 to $30 or $40 extra, depending on the dash camera. And it's needed if you want to hardwire it or if you want to have the ability to record while parked. Now, how do we take these cables and wire them into a vehicle? Do not wire your dash camera like this. You can see I'm pulling the fuse out and it's just looped in here with pressure on the fuse. Even the ignition wire is done the same way. If you are going to wire it to the fuse box, at least use a proper fuse tap. Here we go. We got a Honda Odyssey installed dash camera installed at the car dealer that we're removing. $1,000, and this is what you get. Poke it into the fuse and take it out. Boy, that's properly turned. They just poked it in. No soldered connections. They didn't even use proper fuse taps. They literally took the fuse out, poked it in, and put it in there. Think twice before paying the car dealer to get a dash camera installed. Get it professionally done with us. Okay, so we have the fuse box here, and we're going to look and find a constant 12-volt battery fuse. But what I want to show you is constant power. When we take the fuse out and we use our test probe, we can actually find out which side is constant 12 volt and which side has no 12 volt at all after we've removed the fuse. And the main reason why we want to show you this is because there is a certain way the constant power fuse has to be put in safely. That way it's properly protecting the circuit, and the dash camera also has its proper protection separately. Now, where this all changes is when we get into the ignition wire. So let's go over the equipment we're using. We have the WAMTech DC power supply. At the top, that is 12.5 volts. This is the output that we are outputting to the dash camera so that it can turn on. Underneath that is the actual current draw on the constant power line, which, as you can see, we have 0.263 milliamps in the picture here, which is 263 milliamps or 0.263 amps, and we have 3.2 watts. Now, as we go over to the multimeter, the snap-on multimeter, we have our red and black leads hooked up to either side of the actual ignition line. And we have it hooked up to either side of the ignition line so that we can test the actual current draw. And as you can see in the picture here, we currently have 0 amps of current. So there's absolutely no current draw on the ignition line. Now let's go forward and show you how the 4 dash cameras that we tested pan out. Okay, let's take a look at the Viofo dash cameras. So we have our leads, as you can see, cut in half for ignition wire, and it's going directly to the snap-on multimeter. You can see the Viofo is actually on and recording. The USB-C is plugged in at the top. That way it's powered up, directly plugged into the GPS module. And when we take a look at the actual multimeter, it shows us 0 milliamps of current. It's drawing no current at all on the ignition line. So we have the Thinkware, IROAD, Blackvue, and Vueroid dash cameras all being tested for current draw on the ignition line. The Thinkware, Blackvue, and IROAD are at 0 milliamps of current, and the Vueroid is at 2 milliamps of current on the ignition line, which is negligible. So typically what happens with the ignition wire is it is only monitoring whether the ignition is turned on or off. That's it. It's not drawing any current. Now the Vueroid is drawing 2 milliamps, but 2 milliamps is not even worth having a conversation about. If it was drawing 250 milliamps or 100 milliamps, like all the other dash cameras are on the constant power line, then I would be worried and I would say, hey, you know what? We need to make sure that it's actually put in a certain way, just like we do the constant power. And the main reason why I really want to stress this is because we hear all the time about people who do it themselves and they're trying to find which is the ignition line. They find an ignition line, they're excited they found an ignition line, and then you know what happens? Oh, which side's constant power? Sorry, ignition power is what I meant to say. Which side is ignition power? And what ends up happening is then they put their meter in, they find out which one it is, and then they go back, oh, why do I have these check engine lights on my dash now? And this happens because you've cycled the ignition in your vehicle with the fuse removed. Because they weren't aware of what circuit was proper. And what ends up happening is they end up putting check engine lights on their dash, or please service the driver assistance system, or please service airbags, because they cycled the ignition and they accidentally grabbed an airbag line. But I want to explain that if you are hooking up to ignition, it is only looking for the ignition source. That's the big thing. It's looking for the ignition source. It's not drawing power. It is just monitoring it. So which fuses should I use on my vehicle? This is a great question. And we get asked it all the time on YouTube, but it's very hard to answer because every vehicle is different. And being the fact that I've worked on vehicles for over 25 years now, it's hard for me to just give a blanket statement because there's so many different trim levels of vehicles available on the market. What might work for like one Mercedes-Benz that's a 2023 may not work for another one that has a different trim level, like it now has a sunroof, or it has all-wheel drive, or it has many of these other features on the vehicle that sometimes that same wire or fuse location won't be there. So we need to be very careful with this. So a couple resources that I like to use is I like to go to Fuse-Box.info or go to the Fuse-Box.info YouTube page. They have tons and tons of vehicles listed on here with Fusebox diagrams. And it gives you lots of information that you can actually dive into and find some information, because sometimes vehicles are making it harder to actually get information on what fuse is what and where they are. And sometimes our owner's manual isn't available. Maybe we bought a used vehicle and no owner's manual came with the vehicle. Some fuse boxes don't even have any kind of, like German vehicles are very common for this. They don't actually have any diagram showing what each fuse is. So you're just kind of like, oh, well, hopefully this one's good. But the thing is, if you end up going to a wrong circuit, like you could really cause some challenges. So For instance, I'm just going to use this Kia as an example that I have up on the screen here. So a lot of times on a lot of Kia and Hyundai vehicles, there will be some fuse locations labeled spare. And when we're actually looking at these fuses labeled spare, I would recommend testing them to find out if they're constant power or ignition, because you might find 2 or 3 valid fuse locations that you could use, because that means they're not actually supporting any circuits. They're just spares for possible future options, or maybe your vehicle trim level didn't come with that. The other thing is, a lot of these vehicles on the market have blanks, which means they're not even being used for anything. You look at a Honda and Acura fuse boxes, quite frequently there may be 5 to 10 empty fuse slots. And the question is, are they safe to use? Well, yes, we use them all the time when it comes to hooking up a dash camera. I would not recommend using this for hooking up a battery pack at all, because we don't know what the gauge of wiring is on the backside. But being that a dash camera is less than 1 amp of current, you are not going to do any major electrical damage to your fuse box, right? As long as you're doing the proper testing, verifying at the fuse box that it is 12 volts, right? We want to make sure it's ignition. We want to make sure it's constant power, right? We want to test those things, then you should be 100% fine. Now, if you are looking for a constant power fuse and you don't have any spares, you don't have any blanks, and now you're like, oh, which fuse do I need to use, right? I would recommend looking at certain fuses that you know aren't labeled as SRS, airbag, braking system, collision avoidance. You want to stay away from things that may possibly be a safety device on your vehicle. Because the last thing you want is to have one of your safety devices actually fail while you're driving. That would be very dangerous. Good fuses to consider might be multimedia, audio. You may want to look at like memory if you're looking for ignition or constant power. You may want to look at USB charger, cigarette lighter port. Stuff like this typically is not high risk, but you still need to verify it, because from manufacturer to manufacturer, these fuses could mean different things. Like, it may say cigarette lighter, but it may power other things up, and that's why it's important to test everything and make sure to put the proper fuses back in. If there was a 10 amp fuse in there prior, make sure the 10 amp fuse goes in there again in the proper slot. Are there other ways to install my dash camera? I've noticed that my whole fuse box is completely constant power. There's absolutely no switched ignition. I've also noticed that on my vehicle, the fuse box is completely flush. And if I actually put a fuse in, I can't put my fuse cover back on. Or it's close to my feet, it's kind of dangerous. I feel like I might fit it. Here's a few examples of those solutions.
Lexus and Toyota vehicles, when you're installing a dash cam, a lot of times people are using fuse taps. And if you take a look under the dash, the fuse box is right here. But what's below that? A common place where you rest your foot. The fuse box actually sits flush. So if you use a fuse tap at all, you can easily dislodge it with your foot, just even by accident, which means your vehicle could end up having problems actually driving away. Or if you use a fuse tap, you can't actually put this cover back on. So what we do is actually wire to the back side of the fuse box. That way all the wires are completely hidden and it doesn't affect your fuse box in any way, shape, or form on a Lexus and Toyota vehicle. We typically go to wires that are safe. That way we're not causing any challenges with your vehicle. Think about those questions to ask next time you're getting a Lexus or Toyota for a dash cam installation.
So what is hardwiring? Well, hardwiring is the process of finding the correct wires in your vehicle. Typically, a professional installer would complete this act. They would actually strip it back, and for a company like us, we tend to solder the wires so that they are solid in place. We use 3M electrical tape to tape them up, and we typically use Testa tape or vehicle equivalent tape in order to make it look like it's factory and it belongs back in the vehicle. This is a process that I've been doing for over 25 years. This is a very popular thing that is done in the aftermarket world. This process also involves us having to study and research to make sure we are hooking up to the correct circuits. Some people in the market will actually write stuff on their website like this. None of the work we do will ever void your vehicle's warranty. Unlike many other installers, we do not cut and splice any of your car's factory wiring or make permanent changes to your car. Everything we do is fully removable, non-permanent, and dealer approved, as we work with several dealerships. So what I like to call this is a scare tactic. And I really don't operate our business like this at all. We focus on education. But I will tell you this, I've had more challenges with using fuse taps than with hardwiring. Now let me tell you why. So occasionally I've had customers, they go to the car dealership, and then what the car dealership does is they remove the fuse taps so they can actually diagnose the circuits that are in your vehicle, because they want to see what's going on and they want to rule out the aftermarket accessories that are in there. But what ends up happening is occasionally I've gotten customers going, my parking mode no longer works. So what ends up happening is I end up going and finding out the dealership actually put it on a different fuse location. And I don't think they did this intentionally. Most times it was just by accident. Let's be honest, they're not installing the aftermarket accessories. They're hiring someone like myself or another company out there in order to install these aftermarket accessories. So when we actually solder and hardwire it to the backside, there's no way that they can actually disconnect that at all, which is great. But here's the thing. People will argue, well, then how can they properly diagnose the circuit? By simply unplugging the dash camera, it is completely eliminated from the circuits in the vehicle. So I actually would encourage car dealers to just unplug it if you are trying to verify whether the dash camera is or isn't on that circuit. I think it makes it a lot easier and it reduces the challenges of, oops, I accidentally plugged the fuse in. Because let's be honest, a lot of dash cam companies or aftermarket companies are probably going to charge you to fix that problem because they didn't technically cause it. So we look at what is the path of least resistance of not having those challenges with our customers later on, which is why a lot of times we do choose to hardwire. Now, some customers will ask us to use fuse taps instead, and we typically go by our gut. If we feel that that's a vehicle that we completely feel comfortable with using fuse taps on and we're familiar with the fuse panel, we have no problem with it. Talk to me about certain vehicles like Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche, and I literally won't do it because we have certain ways that we will do it without using fuse taps that we know is 100% highly reliable. We've never had any issues with going to those circuits on those particular vehicles. And my last and final point on hardwiring, I used to run a shop with 8 technicians in the back, and we would do anywhere from 10 to 20 vehicles a day, and we would actually do hardwiring. We also did the majority of car dealer work in the entire city. Between our 2 locations, we had anywhere from 15 techs on staff that were installing car starters, car audio, aftermarket accessories in vehicles for the car dealers on a regular basis. Now, if it really did void your warranty doing this practice, don't you think all these car dealers would be delivering a vehicle with voided warranty? It just doesn't make sense and it doesn't add up. Another alternative solution is the OBD2 cable. A lot of newer vehicles, the fuse panel doesn't even have any ignition power. So you can actually plug this OBD2 cable in and it will actually give you parking mode capabilities. Now, some vehicles, it will take anywhere from 1.5 to 5 minutes before it times out and goes into parking mode because it is waiting for your vehicle's computer to go to sleep. But it is an alternative solution to getting it hardwired or using a fuse tap. The only thing is, when it goes into the dealership to get service, you will need to unplug it in order for them to plug in their scan tool in order to assess any check engine lights or anything like that on the vehicle. Let's go over some mistruths, is what I'm going to call them. Hardwiring a dash camera into my vehicle will void my warranty. Installing with fuse taps is safe. So even though you think hardwiring may void the warranty, that's not actually true. Because when you're adding a fuse tap to a circuit, you're still actually integrating and hooking up to that circuit, which means if you hook up to the wrong circuit, you would be voiding the warranty on that circuit, not on the entire vehicle, but just on that circuit. And I have a video where I talk about this. Let's say you get someone to hook up aftermarket fog lights, and they go and they hook it up to your existing headlight switch, and they wire it incorrectly to that headlight switch. What ends up happening is let's say they blow up the headlight switch. Then you go to the dealer replaces the headlight switch and notices that this wire was hooked up to it, and that's what caused the problem. Well, guess what? You're going to get a bill for it. It's not covered under warranty anymore. And if you're dealing with a reputable shop, they should cover the bill because they wired it wrong. And you can wire it wrong hooking up a fuse tap. You can wire it wrong hooking up hardwire. Any way you look at it, if you hook it up wrong, there is always a chance you could get a bill for that. It's just something you may want to think about, right? If I hardwire it wrong, I'm voiding that circuit, and that means I'm a reputable company. I'm going to want to cover that. If I hook up a fuse tap wrong to a wrong circuit, I may get a bill from the dealer. But after that circuit is fixed, you have full warranty again on the circuit. You do not lose warranty on your entire vehicle. So if you're looking for professional installation, deal with someone who's fully insured, is transparent, has a guarantee, has worked on your vehicle before or a similar one. And if you were looking to support us, we're available in Greater Toronto and Greater Vancouver area. And we do supply and install dash cameras. Check us out, safedrivesolutions.com. Now, I imagine as a result of this video, you are probably going to have questions. There's probably going to be people who are going to make some nice comments about hardwiring. They're going to talk about OBD2 cables and how they're unsafe. There's going to be all sorts of different things. And I can tell you, leave your comments down below. We'd love to hear them. But I can tell you right now, at the end of the day, we have our best interest in trying to do the right thing for the customer. That always has been our thing. And we also want to make sure to educate you, because the amount of people that are saying that you should only use fuse taps is a lot less than the amount of people that are actually hardwiring to your vehicle. And I think you would actually be surprised at how many specialty aftermarket shops hardwire safely into your vehicle's electrical and have been doing it for way longer than I have.